From the moment the exploration teams left to this 24th dimension, the Guardian Sage stood there waiting for a response. For several hundred years, he simply stood there, waiting, taking only short breaks to take care of whatever needs he had, but returning each time to sit there and wait for anything to come out. He worried what happened to them, as he couldn't see deep in there. He couldn't see much through that strange satellite, and even as he watched, he couldn't get much. It wasn't until several hundred years later that communication signals actually arrived, but the signal itself was odd. The children had to explain that they had done something very strange after arriving. You see, upon arriving, they had to unify the bipods that were living on this dimension in this astral plane. The images that were sent back shown these locals looking very much like themselves, yet clearly much stronger. The muscle density was insane in comparison. They weren't quite as large, but still, it was clear that they could do much more physically. Unfortunately, in order to create enough energy to get a message through this strange planetary shield that was naturally here, they had to build massive structures to try and pump enough electricity into their own devices to actually cut through all their interference. On top of that, they had to produce enough power strong enough to open a hole to allow other ships from the other dimensions through. They only had enough to actually recharge the ships, though, for exploration around this new dimension. And to everyone's surprise, this new dimension was absolutely massive in comparison to their own. This one eclipsed at least a half a dozen, if not more. They wouldn't know until they reached out into the stars, but they need ships. And unfortunately, to use that much power, they would end up burning out their own system, so they could only bring in a few ships. The Guardian Sage was very quick to say that he would arrive, as he wanted to see this planet, and he wanted to see what they had done. When he finally arrived in his one ship, flanked by several others of the different nations, he was absolutely delighted by the fertile planet that they had landed on. This resource-rich world was full of many things, to include the gold they needed to keep their own systems operating healthily. When the Guardian Sage finally got a very good look at the inhabitants, he said they were very lovely inhabitants. Although, as he looked into the history that happened over the several centuries, he was slightly dissuaded that his children had been assessing with population growth. The Guardian Sage actually preferred to do that himself, as he had done on so many other worlds. Everybody knew he just loved to assist the locals. As they searched around the planet and saw all the intricacies it has to offer, he was surprised at what was there, these massive dragons that seemed to not care about anything, not dealing with anything that they had to do. In fact, they would dodge all those visiting and even stay away from the locals themselves, keeping themselves at bay just a little bit, but more than willing to hunt each other right in front of everyone to see. Yet, even though it was interesting to watch and unbelievably nice to see this planet, something seemed off. Something was wrong. Something dug even in the back of his head. He looked around, kept looking around left, right, up, and down. Everyone started to ask, what is he looking for? And the Guardian Sage would simply say he felt like he was being watched. Everyone stated that they would get used to that, but for right now, they needed to worry about what was in front of them. The Guardian Sage would take his ship and search across this dimension, reaching across the cosmos itself, to find out what other secrets may be here. Maybe he would find something even more amazing, but he doubted it. While he did so, several other civilizations began to rise from the introduction of their society and their technology. As they started to raise the local population up, they were actually surprised as creatures from seemingly another dimension arrived. It was as though other dimensions were able to somehow lock onto this planet in particular, and just where these ley lines connected, It seems as though one or two of the creatures came in, most of which it didn't really matter, until one of the giant humanoid creatures from Dimension 23, also known as Dimension X, showed up. This creature laid waste to a full civilization of locals until the grandchild of the Guardian Sage retrieved a cellular petrification module. Unfortunately, he had to go on a bit of an odyssey to get all the pieces, as many of them were no longer in one particular place. This module was meant to protect them, but it was also dangerous to be in one piece. The module itself, when pointed at this large bipedal, almost octopi-looking thing, turned it into stone, and then, under its own weight, it began to shatter and crumble into nothing, right into the ocean. Yet, he realized that this device was so dangerous that it absolutely had to be destroyed. Without a second thought, he threw the device into the water, where it sunk to the bottom, where it would fry and then explode, destroying what little remnants of the monster remained. After which, it was a golden age for each of the other three factions as they built up their civilizations. That was until seemingly whatever was watching them. Was that an entity they could not understand? Was it the universe? Did it create the universe? Whatever it might be, it had something to say. Even the Guardian Sage was shocked as he saw the video of creatures of unknown origin arrive on the planet. Most attacked advanced civilizations, destroying what they could, freeing those of the great powers, and as they did so, over time, breeding in with the locals to create much larger and more powerful locals. Each of the great powers blamed each other, and with the Guardian Sage still exploring this dimension far away from the planet, nothing stopped them from rushing against each other and raising their weapons. They each demanded restitution from each other, even though each side claimed that they had nothing to do with it. As this was the case, the Guardian Sage had to return to the Blue Planet once again. As he arrived, the battles were already becoming apocalyptic. They used weapons that split atoms on each other, melting entire civilizations to the ground, setting them on fire, in some cases exploding entire mountain ranges, sending all sorts of ash, dust, debris, completely burying everyone under feet, meters, miles, kilometers of the planet. Looking to see what had happened, the Guardian Sage actually shuddered, as the island nation that they had named Atlantis was already lost, as many of their own devices were sent underneath the ocean and hit the struts that kept it aloft and sunk it down into the depths, destroying everyone there. If they didn't get near or on a shuttle soon, they were immediately swept in by the maelstrom that happened on top, pulling everyone down into the depths, not allowing them to the surface before the darkness took them. After learning of this, the Guardian tried to bring peace with the threat of his massive ship. Everybody knew that he wouldn't fire on this paradise. He enjoyed it far too much. Yet, he moved into position just enough that he could, if he wanted to, make good on said threat. That was the time everything changed. While they still fought, from deep in the depths of the oceans, massive fissures began to crack, open, and shift. Tidal waves swept over the land as the poles began to shift somehow. Massive volcanoes exploded, visible from space, as huge pools of magma shot up and sent up so much that it just seemed to block out the sun. This caused the planet itself to attack everything. In desperation to save them all, the Guardian Sage called for peace from everybody and brought his few ships in. This fleet got very close to the planet as they were going to try to evacuate everyone else. The water from the massive tsunamis reached the massive structures that were able to recharge the ships. The water rushed in far too fast, broke open all the dams they used to hold it back, and it forced too much through, and it simply overloaded each of these large stone structures, suddenly overloaded and shot out even more electronic interference as lightning began to roll across the sky with such force that many couldn't even get close. It is though the shield around the planet itself had come down towards it and started to manifest in the way of bolts of 1.21 gigawatts ripping across the sky. This burst of energy mixed together with what was coming out of their stations and created its own dimensional rift gate right next to the fleet. Before they even knew what was going on, their fleet was being yanked right through the gate. Nothing was going to be able to stop them, even with their advanced technology pushing themselves at full. They were not able to break free. Though this was sudden and unplanned, dimensional travel was normal for them, and everyone was surprisingly calm as their ships were completely ripped out of the dimension. Once on the other side, they could only see what was happening through the outdated sensors of the massive satellite orbiting the blue planet. They were back to square one again. They could see what was going on, and the sage ordered the satellite to fix its sensors on the planet below, and it stopped its rotation and locked itself in orbit. Due to the satellite's constant malfunctioning, even though it continues to transmit, it will never, ever rotate again. Unable to get a good read on what was going on anyway from their position, they needed to jump back to the initial jump point they had from their old dimension into this new one. They eventually got back, and from there they could actually get a much better visual. Not only visual, but some audio, but not much, from the busted satellite. What they saw below absolutely astounded them. Hello everybody, this is Syntax. Thank you so much for joining me on the second chapter of this story. Before I go, I gotta send some special thanks to a few of my subscribers, and those will be Erica Gem, MTF Guard, Sir, Guardian Sage, SS Demon, Chris Dixon, Brian Kemp, and Cause Lynn. Thank you all so much for supporting the channel. Everybody else, I will see you on the next one. This is Syntax, ejecting.